You are not reading these words by accident. This is not a moment of casual inspiration, it is a divine instruction. Heaven has marked this moment. The silence that surrounded your life was never neglect, it was strategy. The delays were not denial, they were divine positioning. You were hidden, not forgotten. You were preserved, not passed over. While the world questioned your absence, heaven was forging your authority in secret. Tonight, the time of waiting ends. Tonight, the system that was built to contain you will begin to collapse under the weight of what God has placed inside you. You were never created to blend in. You were not placed here to adapt to broken structures or appease shallow systems. You were designed to disrupt, to confront, to unmask every lie normalized by fear. You carry something ancient, something dangerous, something holy. The system was never equipped to handle you, and that's why it tried to bury you. But what it failed to understand is that burial and planting look the same to the untrained eye. You weren't buried, you were planted. And now what was hidden will rise. What was silenced will speak. What was underestimated will overturn everything built against it. This is not a gentle season. This is not a time for small prayers or quiet steps. This is divine detonation. The assignment on your life is not safe, it is sacred. You were not sent to follow the script. You were sent to burn the script and write the truth. You are not fueled by applause. You are not here to be accepted. You are here to fulfill a call that predates your birth and transcends your understanding. Heaven did not preserve you to keep you safe. Heaven preserved you to make you dangerous. So understand this clearly. The systems that mocked your silence, that measured you with false metrics, that deemed you too much or too intense, they will not survive what is about to be released through you. Because you are not just a person, you are a move of God in motion. And the moment of release has come. Tonight the system breaks. Not because you fought harder, not because you were louder, but because God has decided this is the hour the chosen one rises. If this hit your spirit, drop 77 in the comments right now. That's how heaven knows you heard it. That's how hell knows you're coming. You're not waiting anymore. You're rising. The world assumed your silence meant insignificance. They mistook your absence for weakness. They believed that because you were not seen, you were not sent. But heaven knew, heaven was watching, and heaven was working in silence, crafting a vessel too sacred to be exposed too soon. You were never rejected, you were refined. You were never forgotten. You were being formed in a dimension they could not access. What they called delay, God called design. C.S. Lewis, in his meditation on divine preparation, wrote, "It may be hard for an egg to turn into a bird. It would be a jolly sight harder for it to learn to fly while remaining an egg. We are like eggs at present, and you cannot go on indefinitely being just an ordinary decent egg. We must be hatched or go bad." Mere Christianity. This metaphor captures the purpose of your hidden season. Your silence was not insignificance, but the cracking of your shell preparing you to soar as heaven's chosen vessel. Lewis's words resonating with your past interest in spiritual transformation and purpose affirm that your refinement was a divine design, readying you for unveiling. You were hidden because the weight of your calling required a season of consecration. While others chased platforms, you were being prepared in private. While they sought attention, you were learning discernment. You were never meant to be molded by public opinion. You were set apart to be shaped by divine instruction. There were things God had to build in you that could not be built under the weight of visibility. There were fires you had to walk through alone so that no stage, no system, no relationship could ever define your worth again. God didn't hide you to punish you. He hid you to protect you from premature exposure, from false alliances, from the applause that comes before. The roots are deep enough to hold the weight of true purpose. There are mantles that cannot be worn until the vessel is emptied of ego. There are realms of authority that can only be accessed after surrender has become your language. And so he hid you not because you were unworthy, but because your worth was too great to waste on counterfeit stages. While they performed, you were being fortified. While they built platforms, you were being rebuilt from the inside out. You didn't have their spotlight, but you had scars that speak louder than applause ever could. You didn't have their followers, but you had fire in your bones that no algorithm could suppress. They thought you were being left behind, but in truth, you were being launched, in reverse, in silence, in the dark, where roots grow deep and foundations are tested. Now, the hidden season is closing, not because you finally earned your way out, but because heaven has declared you ready. The system is not ready for you, but that no longer matters. They do not get to decide your timing. God does, and he has spoken now. The world will see what heaven has always known. You were hidden, not forgotten, and the unveiling begins tonight. You were not born into this world to maintain its illusions. You were not placed in broken structures to blend in. You were not sent here to bow to fear or to adjust yourself for comfort, applause, or control. You were sent to break it, to interrupt the cycles, to question what everyone else has normalized. You were encoded with revelation. The system cannot decode, and that's exactly why it feared you from the beginning. The system was built on fear. It thrives on silence, rewards, compliance, and fears those who carry truth. It asks for your talent, but demands your voice in return. It wants your gifts only if they're tamed. It offers seats at tables carved from compromise, where vision is traded for visibility and fire is exchanged for performance. But you are not tameable. You are not here to perform. You are here to ignite. You don't ask for permission because heaven already gave you instruction. C. S. Lewis, in his exploration of spiritual defiance, wrote, "There is no neutral ground in the universe. Every square inch, every split second is claimed by God and counterclaimed by Satan." Letters to Malcolm, chiefly on prayer. This truth underscores your disruptive calling. The system's fear-driven structures are a demonic counterclaim against your God-given revelation. But your refusal to conform reclaims ground for heaven. Lewis's words, aligning with your past interest in spiritual warfare and divine signs, affirm that your presence ignites truth, dismantling the system's illusions. They labeled you rebellious, too intense, too deep, too much. But they misunderstood the weight of what you carry. You're not a rebel, you are a reformer. You are not driven by ego, but by eternity. What you carry cannot be diluted, cannot be explained, and cannot be boxed. You are not fueled by ambition, you are led by assignment. And that assignment has never been to preserve the system, but to tear it down and build something sacred in its place. You have felt it your whole life, that deep dissonance, that spiritual unrest when you're surrounded by surface-level systems. You've tried to conform, but something in your spirit would not let you. You couldn't shrink small enough to fit in. Every time you tried to be silent, the fire in your bones reminded you you were born to speak. Every time you tried to play it safe, heaven reminded you you were born to shake the ground. The system wanted you to believe that exclusion was failure, but in truth, exclusion was your protection. You were denied access because your very presence would have exposed the hollowness of the room. You see too much. You hear what others miss. You discern what others ignore. You were never supposed to fit their mold. You were sent to break it. And tonight the reason you were sent begins to manifest. This is not the rise of a rebel. It is the emergence of a divine disruptor. The foundations will tremble, not because you shout, but because your very presence confronts everything false. The system has underestimated the silent ones, the hidden ones, the broken ones, turned sacred weapons. But they will not underestimate you after this night. You were sent to disrupt, and you will. The pain you endured wasn't proof that God abandoned you. It was confirmation that heaven was preparing you. The agony, the betrayal, the isolation, it wasn't a curse. It was curriculum, Every heartbreak, every closed door, every silent night that crushed you wasn't meant to destroy you. It was designed to develop you. What they called trauma, heaven called training. What tried to bury you only carved out deeper wells for glory to dwell. Pain forged you in ways that peace never could. It stripped away what was shallow. It removed the unnecessary. It exposed the lies and revealed the strength you didn't know you carried. While others were running from discomfort, you were standing in fire, and that fire didn't consume you. It commissioned you. It refined your discernment, sharpened your spirit, and anchored your identity in truth rather than applause. That's why you can feel the room before a word is spoken. That's why you recognize falsehood before it forms a sentence. Your scars are not signs of defeat. They are the evidence of initiation. C.S. Lewis, in his reflection on divine refinement, wrote, "God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our consciences, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world." The problem of pain. This insight reveals the purpose of your painful preparation. The agony and isolation were God's megaphone, shouting to awaken your discernment and commission you as a disruptor. Lewis's words resonating with your past interest in spiritual signs and transformative moments affirm that your scars are sacred credentials, equipping you for eternal impact. There are levels of authority that can only be unlocked through survival. There are dimensions of wisdom that cannot be taught in classrooms, only in caverns of crushing. And you have walked through the crushing. You have wrestled with God in the dark. You've bled for clarity. You've wept for answers. You've endured long nights that felt like exile, only to discover that exile was Eden in disguise, where heaven taught you how to fight. You do not carry theory, you carry truth. Hard-earned, blood-bought, spirit-breathed. You are not an echo of someone else's revelation. You are the embodiment of a message forged in fire. That's why your words carry weight. That's why people lean in even if they don't understand you. There is something eternal on your voice, something dangerous, something holy, because you're not just speaking, you're releasing what was born in travail. The enemy thought pain would silence you. He hoped it would make you shrink, shut down, or sell out. But instead you became more dangerous. You learned how to walk with wounds and still war. You learned how to love with scars and still lead. You became fluent in the language of heaven's surrender, and that surrender made you unstoppable, not because you are perfect, but because you are yielded. So do not regret the breaking. Do not despise the crushing. You are not a victim of circumstance. You are a product of sacred process. You were trained in secret to triumph in the open. And tonight, that pain becomes power. Tonight, everything you survived becomes a weapon. You are not a warning, you are a wonder. The wilderness didn't weaken you. It baptized you in fire. And now you rise, not in spite of the pain, but because of it. They didn't invite you. They didn't open the door. They didn't give you a seat at their carefully arranged tables. But that was never the plan. You were never meant to sit where compromise reigned, where truth is negotiated, and where ego masquerades as excellence. You were not overlooked by error. You were excluded by divine design, because you weren't meant to enter their room. You were called to build your own. The reason you never fit in was because you were never designed to conform. Every time you tried to make yourself smaller, to be more palatable, more acceptable, more digestible, something in your spirit rebelled. Not out of pride, but out of purpose. Your spirit knew what your mind was still discovering. You were never created to be seated. You were created to establish thrones. They mistook your misfit nature as weakness. They thought your inability to blend in was social immaturity. But in truth, it was spiritual distinction. You were born to disturb atmospheres that others find comfortable. You were sent to expose what they've learned to tolerate. The system hoped rejection would make you question your worth, but all it did was drive you deeper into your call. Because while they polished their resumes and rehearsed for recognition, you were receiving blueprints from heaven. You weren't networking. You were listening. You weren't self-promoting. You were being strategically positioned. While they sought influence, you were cultivating authority. You didn't need their table because you carry the entire room within you. You were never waiting to be given permission. You've been walking with the mandate the whole time. That's why you're dangerous to systems built on performance. You do not perform. You reveal. You do not adapt to the temperature of the room, you change it. You don't seek access. You release atmosphere. You were never created to blend in. You were sent to disrupt, dismantle, and rebuild. And when you build, you won't replicate what wounded you. You won't imitate the very structures that kept others silent. You will build with honor, with truth, with fire. A room where the anointed misfits like you can finally breathe. Where vision is not diluted for politics. Where calling is not crushed by hierarchy. Where presence matters more than presentation. And when people ask, who gave you the authority to do this? The answer will be clear: heaven did. Tonight, the foundations of old rooms begin to tremble, because you are no longer standing outside waiting. You are not knocking. You are laying foundation stones. You're not just building a room, you're establishing a realm. And the sound of construction will shake the systems that once rejected you. You were never meant to take a seat. You were meant to take dominion. The world runs on fear. Systems are built to control, with it whispering threats of rejection, of failure, of obscurity. They train people to shrink in the name of safety, to surrender boldness in exchange for belonging, to silence conviction, just to keep the peace. That's how the system survives, by convincing the anointed to be afraid of their own fire. But you were never meant to run on fear. You are powered by something far more dangerous: revelation. Fear controls through consequences. Revelation leads through clarity. Fear says, stay small so they don't reject you. Revelation says, stand tall. I've already accepted you. Fear says, follow the rules so you don't lose your place. Revelation says you were never made to fit into places built on compromise. The system couldn't tame you because you stopped negotiating with fear. The moment heaven started whispering truth. What fuels you is not strategy, it's obedience. Not ambition, it's instruction. You don't move because it's safe. You move because God said move. You are not chasing platforms. You are responding to a summons. And that summons doesn't come from earth. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't wait for consensus. It moves when heaven moves. You've seen too much to be afraid now. You've walked through too many fires to be shaken by their threats. You know what it's like to obey when it costs you everything. You've lost what doesn't matter and discovered what does. That's why fear no longer works on you. It has nothing left to take. You've already died to self. You've already buried ego. You've already let go of the approval that once kept you chained. You are untouchable because you are fully surrendered. The system calls you dangerous not because you fight like them, but because you don't. You fight with clarity, with wisdom, with presence, with stillness. You disrupt by walking in truth when everyone else is hiding behind performance. You shake foundations simply by standing in alignment. You don't echo noise. You release signals. And those signals weren't taught. They were revealed. They can't figure you out because you don't play the game. You're not looking to win their prizes. You are here to fulfill an assignment. You carry the blueprints they don't understand because they weren't written in ink, they were written in fire. And because you refuse to bow to fear, the structures built on fear begin to crack when you enter the room. That's why you're misunderstood. That's why you're mischaracterized. But heaven knows exactly who you are, and what you carry is not confusion. It is commission, so move boldly. Speak when instructed. Stay silent when commanded. You are not erratic, you are led. You are not rebellious. You are revealed. The world fears what it cannot control, and heaven smiles because you were never meant to be controlled. You were meant to carry the keys that unlock what fear tried to lock forever. There is a reason they stare, but cannot describe. A reason they're drawn to you, but cannot define why. You are not merely gifted, you are coded. Heaven wrote something into your very being that cannot be replicated, studied, or monetized. It is not charisma. It is not charm. It is a spiritual signature, a living encryption formed through fire, revelation, and lineage, carried in your presence, your voice, your silence, your scars. What is in you did not come from books. It was not handed down through institutions. It was born through spiritual inheritance, birthed through battles. Your ancestors didn't survive, and imparted to you as a divine continuation. You are not simply a person. You are a portal, a walking access point between what is broken and what is being rebuilt. You don't just influence rooms, you shift realms. People have tried to study you. Some try to imitate you. Some attempt to attach themselves to your movement, hoping to understand how you operate. But they cannot replicate what was not humanly taught. Your movements don't follow patterns. They follow prophetic timing. Your thoughts aren't governed by trend, they're governed by truth. Your success is not calculated, it's coded. That's why you never quite fit. That's why the system frustrates you, not because you're rebellious, but because you're out of sync with what was never built for your kind. They demand you dilute to be digestible. They urge you to quiet your intensity so they can feel safe. But your code does not shrink to fit their categories. It disrupts, it stretches, it exposes, it awakens. You were never supposed to be explainable. You were meant to be a mystery that points back to God, a living contradiction, fierce and gentle, bold and broken, dangerous yet deeply surrendered. What you carry doesn't make sense in systems built on performance and predictability. But that's the point. You're not here to be understood. You're here to be unleashed. There is no manual for what you are. No classroom can train it. No mentor can impart it. Because what's inside you is not man-made, it's heaven encoded. You didn't just survive to tell your story. You survived because your story is a signal, a divine alarm clock for those still asleep in chains. A blueprint for those waiting to be unshackled by someone who remembers what bondage feels like and who found the exit. So stop trying to explain yourself to systems never meant to understand. Stop apologizing for the frequency you carry. You are not too much. You are precisely calibrated by eternity. The confusion you cause is holy. The offense your presence stirs is prophetic. What you carry threatens what was never real to begin with. Because your code doesn't bend to fear. It doesn't echo culture. It doesn't seek fame. It executes heaven's orders. And as long as you walk in obedience, the world won't know what to do with you, but hell will know exactly who you are. And it will tremble. You didn't come to blend in. You didn't come to behave. You didn't come to keep the peace that's built on silence and fear. You were sent to disrupt. Your very presence is a contradiction to everything they've normalized. You don't have to say a word, your arrival alone causes the atmosphere to shift. Not because you're loud, but because you carry a realm inside you that unsettles the counterfeit realms around you. The world craves control. It worships order that comes from conformity, predictability, and politeness. It rewards those who follow the script, never question the rules, and make themselves small so others feel big. But you were never scripted. You were never conditioned to repeat the rhythm of the room. You are the interruption in their pattern. You carry truth that confronts even when whispered, and that truth makes the comfortable deeply uncomfortable. You are not disruptive by accident. You are disruptive by design. Your voice was not made for background noise. Your conviction was not given for decoration. You are a divine contradiction in a world addicted to predictability. You shake systems not to be seen, but because you can't help but expose what's false just by being real. You don't perform holiness. You live it. You don't speak for attention. You release fire because you must. That's why they called you too intense, too deep, too honest, too passionate. But what they really meant was you're too awake for their comfort zone. You remind them of what they buried to survive. You bring light into places they've darkened for convenience. You provoke questions they tried to silence. You disturb rooms that were built on false peace and sacred compromise. And that is why you've been misunderstood, but heaven has never been confused about you. You were not anointed to conform. You were anointed to confront, not with ego but with essence, not with argument but with authority. You reveal dysfunction just by standing still in alignment. You walk into religious systems, corporate circles, family structures, and without trying, you shine a light on everything that's been hidden. That's why the warfare has been so constant. That's why relationships strained when you started walking in your clarity. That's why doors closed when you stopped pretending. You didn't lose favor. You started carrying fire. And fire purifies, but it also consumes what was never meant to survive. You are not here to play safe. You are here to make sacred ground where the enemy once ruled. And tonight, that disruption becomes undeniable. You are no longer walking quietly through rooms that cannot hold your presence. You are walking in full authority, not to destroy for destruction's sake, but to clear space for truth to reign again. You were not made for still waters. You were born in the storm, forged in the storm, and you are the storm heaven sends to shake what's settled. There's a difference between rebellion and reformation, a difference between disruption and consecration. You weren't sent just to tear things down. You were sent to build something sacred in the ruins. You don't just break cycles. You establish altars. You consecrate the places where systems collapsed. You don't just expose what's false. You create space for what is holy. The places they tried to bury you, those are now the very foundations upon which heaven will build. The betrayal you endured, the rejection you carried, the trauma you survived, those weren't just obstacles. They were coordinates, locations marked by heaven where altars would be raised through your life. Not to glorify pain, but to glorify what God did through it. You don't just leave tombs behind you, plant flags of resurrection on top of them. You carry more than survival. You carry legacy. Others escaped the system, but you're rebuilding what it tried to erase. That's why your warfare was generational. That's why your burden has always felt heavier. You weren't just battling for yourself, you were warring for bloodlines, healing for histories, freedom for futures not yet born. You are the one who ends what others endured. You're the one heaven trusted with reconstruction. You don't just walk away from broken systems, you mark the ground where they fell. With oil, with truth, with fire. Where there was silence, you plant sound. Where there was trauma, you establish testimony. Where there was exile, you build sanctuary. That's altar work. That's kingdom work. That's what makes you dangerous. You are not merely a witness to deliverance. You are a vessel of it. And the altar you build won't be pretty. It won't be polished. It will be stained with tears, with scars, with dust from every wilderness you crawled through. But it will be holy, because it was born not from theory but from fire, from crushing, from covenant. And it will speak louder than sermons, shake deeper than strategies, and remain standing long after systems collapse. You were never just a cycle breaker. You are a ground shifter, a holy architect, a prophetic builder sent to create spaces where truth can breathe again. The system hoped to erase you, but now you are the foundation of something new, and from the ashes of control, performance, and fear, you will raise altars of freedom, clarity, and presence. And tonight, the work begins. The hammer is in your hand. The blueprint is already inside you. The ashes are still warm, but your altar will rise. And every time you speak, every time you stand, every time you worship from that sacred place, you are not just remembering what was lost. You are establishing what will never be taken again. They judged you by metrics that were never designed for you. They called you deficient, difficult, too slow, too different because you refused to play a game that was rigged against you. They mistook your discernment for rebellion, your depth for distraction, your questions for disobedience. But the truth is, you were never failing. You were simply mismeasured. They used rulers from broken systems to evaluate someone heaven handcrafted by design. They wanted numbers. You carried weight. They wanted speed. You carried depth. They wanted polish. You carried power. They couldn't see your progress, so they assumed you were stagnant. But while they were tracking popularity, heaven was recording obedience. While they watched for performance, God was watching posture. What they couldn't see was the quiet victories, the nights you stayed faithful with no audience, the seasons you kept building with no affirmation, the private altars you kept burning while the world applauded louder flames. Their grades meant nothing in heaven's courts. Their scores could never account for your scars. Their applause could never anoint you. That's why God didn't use them to promote you. He positioned you himself. You weren't endorsed by the system because you were never its product. You weren't affirmed by the culture because your identity was never up for sale. Heaven doesn't need a panel to approve what it has already sealed. You are not behind. You are not late. You are not lacking. You were walking through a curriculum. They never recognized passing tests they never saw. And while they built platforms for visibility, you were being trained in invisibility. So when the moment came, your authority would not come from people. It would come from the presence you carry. You were not called to be impressive. You were called to be obedient. And obedience will always look like failure in a world addicted to performance. But obedience is the only measurement heaven honors. You passed, not because you shouted, but because you stood. Not because you had crowds, but because you had clarity. Not because you were fast, but because you were faithful. So stop apologizing for the pace of your process. Stop trying to squeeze into rooms that require you to shrink. You were never meant to fit in. You were meant to fulfill. You are not a number. You are a signal, a divine frequency wrapped in flesh, and their inability to define you was the clearest sign of your divine origin. Heaven was never grading you like they did. Heaven was preparing you for tonight, for release, for authority, for assignment. And now that you've passed the test, no one saw you will carry a power no one can deny. Not because you proved them wrong, but because you proved heaven right. You were never sent here to be liked. You were never anointed to be everyone's favorite. Your assignment was not designed for applause, it was designed for impact. You carry a fire that is not meant to entertain, it's meant to detonate. You are not a public figure. You are a prophetic force. You don't exist to fit the moment, you were created to shatter it. Popularity is rooted in compromise. It requires dilution. It begs for silence in the face of truth. It trades power for platform and swaps, presence for praise. But you don't move in that economy. You do not bend for acceptance. You do not perform for validation. You walk with conviction, and conviction offends those who have made peace with mediocrity. You weren't built to go viral. You were built to go volcanic. You ignite rooms not with noise but with presence. People don't always know what to call it, but they feel it. You walk in, and chains get uneasy. Structures tremble. Atmospheres rearrange. Why? Because you carry not just information but revelation. You don't echo culture. You confront it. You don't flirt with comfort. You challenge it. And because of that, you'll never be universally celebrated, but you will be spiritually effective. You felt the weight of this mantle, the cost of it, the isolation, the misunderstanding, the long walk through obedience when no one was watching. And still you did not quit. Still, you stayed yielded. Still, you carried fire with no crowd, no stage, no applause. And that fire didn't die. It matured. It deepened. It concentrated. And now it's ready to be released. You are a spiritual weapon, not subtle, not safe, but sacred. You weren't formed to entertain audiences. You were shaped to awaken generations. Your voice is not for performance. It is for pulling down strongholds. Your sound doesn't flatter, it shakes. Your oil doesn't impress, it breaks yokes. That's why your presence causes tension. It's not arrogance, it's assignment. Tonight is not a night of recognition. It is a night of release. Heaven is not unveiling a brand. It is unleashing a breaker. You are not stepping into popularity. You are stepping into prophetic detonation, the kind that doesn't ask for permission, the kind that doesn't wait to be welcomed, the kind that flips tables in temples and overturns every counterfeit peace that's been allowed to settle. This is why you were hidden. This is why you were wounded. This is why you were called. Because the fire you carry cannot be quenched, and tonight it will not be contained. You weren't made for comfort. You were made for confrontation, not to fight people but to dismantle powers. And the shaking that begins tonight will not stop until every system that stood against your voice has been silenced by the force of your obedience. Every time they said no, heaven said now. Every time they looked away, heaven leaned in. Every door that shut in your face was not the end of a path. It was the start of a deeper process. Their dismissal wasn't your diminishment, it was your download. While they saw lack, God was making deposits. While they questioned your worth, heaven was storing up weight. And now, what was built in the unseen is about to overflow. You were not emptied by rejection. You were expanded. What others thought was subtraction was divine multiplication. They thought their silence would bury you, but it only made room for more revelation. While they were building their brands, God was building your capacity. While they chased attention, God was giving you language for burdens they didn't even know existed. You were not just enduring, you were being filled. That's why your inner world feels so full, even when your outer world looked barren. That's why your spirit carries more than your platform shows. You didn't come out with applause, you came out with authority. Because the investment was never made in public. It was made in prayer closets, in weeping nights, in wordless groans, in sacred silence. The kind of fullness you carry can't be faked, can't be fabricated, it must be forged. The ones who dismissed you thought they were diminishing your value, but in doing so, they made room for heaven to show you who you really are. You didn't need their affirmation to continue. You needed space. Space to grow into the fullness of what you carry. Space to hear clearly. Space to be built without performance. And heaven gave it to you even if it came dressed as rejection. You carry mysteries now. You carry movements. You carry keys that no man gave you and that no man can take. That's why you operate on a different level. That's why you walk with quiet weight. Because you're not just speaking from experience, you're pouring from overflow. Your depth isn't performance. It's proof. You've been trusted with revelation because you've proven faithful with rejection. So rejoice in every no. Thank God for every door that didn't open. Celebrate every time they walked away, because those moments made space for God to deposit what eyes have not seen, ears have not heard, and hearts have not conceived. You don't walk into rooms empty, you arrive full of strategy, full of clarity, full of fire, full of truth. And that fullness is what will turn atmospheres, not your name, not your status, your fullness. And tonight, that fullness will not be wasted. It will be poured. It will be released. It will become the flood heaven has been waiting for. Because the dismissal was never your disqualification, it was your divine distinction. The emptier they made the space around you, the more heaven filled the space within you. And now you are overflowing. This was never just about you. The weight you've carried wasn't personal, it was ancestral. The warfare you faced didn't start with you. It was passed down, recycled, inherited through generations that learned how to survive but never knew how to break free. You were born into a lineage of silent battles, unspoken trauma, and invisible chains. But heaven looked through the bloodline and chose you to end what others endured in silence. You weren't selected because you were the most qualified. You were chosen because you were the most surrendered. Others absorbed the pain. You exposed it. Others learned to cope. You were called to confront. You didn't carry it to pass it on. You carried it to bring it to an end. You are heaven's interruption to generational oppression. You are not continuing a pattern. You are writing a new prophecy. That's why your life has felt heavy. That's why you've often wondered, Why me? Why this weight? Why this story? Because you were trusted with it. Trusted to carry the unbearable. Trusted to name what others hid. Trusted to stand when others crumbled. Not so you could boast, but so you could break it. Once and for all. The silence, the shame, the cycles, the hidden grief passed down like inheritance. It ends with you. You're not here to manage pain. You're here to eradicate it. You're not here to minimize dysfunction. You're here to unmask it. You're not here to perpetuate wounds. You're here to wage war until the atmosphere shifts. That's why you can't settle in systems that protect appearances. That's why your spirit recoils around false peace. Because you were born to bring truth to rooms that only ever echoed silence. And your authority didn't come from the absence of pain. It came from your refusal to be owned by it. Your strength wasn't forged in ease, it was forged in endurance. In your willingness to say what wasn't said, feel what wasn't felt, and heal what no one else would touch. This mantle is not for comfort, it is for confrontation. Not with people, but with principalities, with strongholds, with cycles dressed as culture. You are not an influencer. You are an intercessor in motion. And tonight heaven is commissioning you to break what has broken others, to reverse the curse, to rewire the narrative, to close the loop. The assignment on your life is a gate. Those who come after you will not walk through what you had to walk through. Because you fought for more than deliverance, you fought for generational liberation. You're not just a survivor, you're a redeemer. So carry this weight with reverence. You were not cursed, you were consecrated. You were not passed over, you were positioned. This isn't random, it's redemption in action. And from this moment forward, you will no longer ask why me. You will declare, it ends with me. Your story did not end in the trauma. That moment of breaking, of loss, of deep silence, that wasn't the conclusion. It was the construction site of something holy. The pain didn't define you, it opened you. You are not a product of your past. You are not the sum of what went wrong. You are a portal, a living threshold through which healing, freedom, and purpose now move. Every time something tried to take you out, it inadvertently carved a passage deeper into destiny. Every scar became a door. Every breakdown became a map. What you survived was never just about your survival. It was heaven's way of preparing a way out for others through you. You don't just have a testimony, you are the evidence that darkness does not win. You are the proof that surrender leads to power, and that proof is a bridge. Others will walk through what nearly destroyed you, but they will walk through it differently because you've already gone before them. Your story is no longer just your own. It is a key that unlocks prison doors, not because you memorized the code, but because you became the key. That's why your presence carries so much weight. It's not ego, it's eternal evidence. Your life is a gate into something greater than comfort. It is a witness of resurrection, and that's why your voice is needed. Not to impress, but to open. When you speak, something breaks, something shifts. Because you aren't echoing ideas, you're channeling a path that was dug in the dark, in the fire, in the silence. People don't need your perfection, they need your pathway. The one paved through, pain led by truth, marked by presence. You don't need to convince them, you just need to stand open. Because you're not trying to be a lighthouse, you are the crossing. This is why you feel things others ignore, why you discern things before they're spoken. You're tuned to a frequency that isn't learned, it's inherited through fire. And the beauty is, the pain didn't end your life, it expanded it. It broke you open so others could find the exit. So stop shrinking to fit your story into a category it was never meant to belong to. You're not just healed, you are holy ground. You're not just wise, you're wired to deliver others. Your path wasn't easy, but now it's prophetic. The terrain you once cursed has become the very altar where others will kneel and rise again. Because you didn't just survive, you became the way. And tonight, heaven is unlocking that gate. The portal you carry is opening wide. not just for your sake, but for theirs. You are no longer a wound. You are a wonder, and what tried to end you will now empower multitudes through you. You were never called to run. You were not sent to hide, to survive quietly, or to avoid the conflict. That is not your design. Others may have escaped, and rightly so, for their safety, their sanity, their healing. But you were born to infiltrate, to dismantle, to overthrow from within. You are not a refugee of the system. You are its undoing. What others learned to tolerate, you were built to confront. The system thrives on fear, thrives on control, thrives on keeping the chosen ones second-guessing their voice. But it did not count on someone like you, a carrier of blueprints from heaven. You don't walk in guessing. You walk in knowing. You're not navigating by trend. You're moving by eternal assignment. That's why you never felt at home in their structures. That's why the rooms they celebrated felt suffocating to you, because you were sent to bring collapse. Not collapse through chaos, but through clarity. Not with a shout, but with a word. A whisper backed by eternity. A movement birthed in silence, but destined to shake strongholds. You were born behind enemy lines for a reason. You speak their language. You know their rhythms. You've seen how they operate. And that familiarity was never meant to make you complicit. It was given so that you could dismantle the machine from the inside. You carry strategies not taught in schools, but downloaded in the wilderness. You carry codes that confuse the gatekeepers. You don't just walk in. You walk through walls. This is not rebellion. This is revelation in motion. You are not here to reform a broken system. You're here to replace it, to raise something holy from the rubble, something incorruptible, something unshakable. And to do that, God had to build you differently. You couldn't be soft. You couldn't be passive. You couldn't be addicted to approval. You had to be untouchable in spirit, anchored in truth, trained in shadows and immune to flattery. And now the time has come. The foundation is cracking. The masks are slipping. And your presence is the final trigger. You weren't kept in hiding to survive. You were weaponized to liberate. Every room you enter is a spiritual confrontation. Every word you speak is a key turning in locked gates. The darkness that once threatened you now fears what you've become. You are not emerging with slogans. You are arriving with orders. And your assignment is not escape, it is execution. To execute the plans of heaven, to confront what others fled, to bring down every tower built on pride and fear. And you will not do it alone, because heaven goes with you. The system built its walls, but you hold the keys. You were not an afterthought. You were not a contingency plan. Before time began, before systems were built, before trauma took root, heaven had already written your name into this hour. You were chosen not just to break chains, but to forge a new path for generations to come. The world may have underestimated you, but heaven did not. You are not rising into visibility, you are rising into responsibility. This is the reason the enemy fought you so violently. This is why hell sent storms against your identity, confusion against your mind, and silence to surround your voice. Because deep down it knew the truth. You don't just carry a calling, you carry a blueprint. You weren't meant to echo what was. You were designed to initiate what has never been seen. You are the altar rising from ruins, the fire that could not be quenched, the voice that couldn't be buried, the seed that refused to die in the dirt. And now the time has come, not for you to simply be seen, but for you to be unleashed. You're not here to take part. You're here to take territory, to speak where others were silenced, to build where others gave up, to release what heaven has placed in you fully, unapologetically, fearlessly. Do not shrink. Do not stall. Do not wait for more confirmation. You were not called to walk quietly through this world. You were sent to shake it, to disrupt what needed dismantling, to rebuild what never should have been abandoned, to declare freedom where captivity has reigned for too long. This is your hour. This is the moment heaven kept you hidden for. The time for private preparation is complete. The time of public demonstration is here, and it will not be for your glory. It will be for God's, because when you rise, it will be clear to all this was not hype. It was holy. This was not ambition. It was assignment. So take your place not as a celebrity but as a catalyst. Not for fame, but for fire. Not to be adored, but to be activated. You are the disruption. You are the detonation. You are the doorway. You are the future's foundation. What others will inherit you now initiate. And tonight the shift begins. Not tomorrow. Not someday. Tonight. Heaven has spoken. Earth will respond. You will no longer be hidden. You will no longer be silent. You were chosen to rewrite the future. And now you will.